First thing, 179D. 179D is the energy efficient commercial building deduction. What I'm going to do is give you a quick definition of what this is, and then we're going to dig into these changes because changes are significant. And then we're going to pull Marlon in and see what the effect of these changes are going to be. This is the 179D is a deduction for really 2 users historically, now three users starting in the year 2023, and that's commercial building owners and designers of government buildings. Starting in 2023, designers of tax exempt entities can also use this. And what happens is the designer gets this deduction allocated to them. This has been around a while, since 2005. It actually, the 179D became permanent at the end of 2020 in the Consolidated Appropriation Act. And really what we're going to talk about is the significant changes that have happened to the deduction in the IRA. I think I like saying IRA rather than Inflation Reduction Act. The current law or the current regulations as written are accelerated depreciation for energy efficient commercial buildings. That's really what it is for the owner of a commercial building. Historically, it's been $1.80 a square foot or up to $1.80 a square foot. This year in 2022, it's $1.88 a square foot. That's the value of the potential deduction. That deduction can be broken into separate components, and we can get a smaller deduction if we don't hit the entire $1.80 or $1.88. To hit a $1.88 deduction, we have to show that this commercial building, or up until 2023, that'll expand to not tax exempt buildings, or currently in 2022, government buildings, we have to show that one of these buildings is 50% more energy efficient than a hypothetical building was in the past. It's all computer modeling. We look at the buildings, we computer model building as if it was meeting ASHRAE standards. That's the American Society of Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Engineers. I think I got that right. Marlon can correct me if I'm wrong later. But they have to meet these standards. Look at sometime in the past. Let's say it's 2007. We look at a building that was placed in service, let's say in 2018, do a computer model. Is this building more energy efficient than the hypothetical version of this building would have been in 2007? If so, it's 50% more energy efficient. I get to accelerate $1.80 a square foot of depreciation from 39 years to 1 year. That's the value. It's accelerating depreciation. The current law allows me to break that down into components, and I can get 60 cents a square foot if I meet HVAC requirements or building envelope requirements or lighting requirements. That's going to go away starting in 2023. We still live under those rules in 2022. In 2023, it's all or nothing. And the percentage of energy reduction is changing too, and we'll talk about that, but it's all or nothing. We can't break it down into individual components anymore starting next year. We live under the same rules this year. 2022, same rules we've always been. Starting next year, and we've already mentioned this, but nonprofit tax exempt organizations can allocate this to the designer of their property. They can't use this deduction. Government entities can't use this deduction. They're not a tax-paying entity. Therefore, they're allowed, as an incentive to make these buildings more energy efficient, they're allowed to allocate this deduction to the designer, which is designers typically your engineer, your architect, your general contractor, your mechanical contractor. Somebody in that realm is who gets this allocated, gets this free deduction. That's expanding in the year 23 to include nonprofits, which also include private colleges, university, includes tribal governments. There's a lot of things that fall into this arena. The credit not only enhanced that way, or deduction, not credit, sorry, that deduction not only enhanced that way, the deduction can be as high as $5 per square foot starting in the year 2023, almost 3 times what it was in the past. And so what that's going to do is allow us to look at smaller buildings to get this deduction, because the value is based on the size of the building. And in reality, we wanted something at a minimum 10,000 square feet, probably more like 20,000 square feet in the past. That's going to shrink starting the year 2023. We're going to be able to help smaller buildings, the owners of smaller buildings or designers of smaller buildings take advantage of this deduction, because the value of that deduction will go up because it's $1 per square foot value. I had mentioned earlier, the threshold to qualify is changing. It's no longer going to be 50% more energy efficient, but it's going to be 25%. We lower the threshold, but, and Marlon will talk about this, we also have a more stringent base period we look at. And so it'll be harder to hit. It would be hard to hit the 50%. And that's one reason they changed it to 25. There was a secondary rule out there called the interim lighting rule, where you can get anywhere from 30 cents to 60 cents a square foot if you're only looking at lighting. That still exists in 2022. That will go away in 2023. And now an interesting thing is this deduction could be taken every 3 years. In the past, if you had a building, you did it once on a building, you couldn't do it again. But if you do some work on this same building you already took this for, you could potentially every 3 years take this accelerated depreciation. That's another change. Those are some significant changes. Again, Marlon's going to expand on that in a few minutes. But the one thing I want to point out, many of you are probably familiar with cost segregation. Cost segregation you can do on a property you purchased. 179, a purchase itself is not good enough. You have to do something to that building. And something is build it from the ground up, or do some kind of remodel, addition, enhancement, and retrofit improvement, something to the building. Purchase alone is not enough. Types of buildings, I think you all have an idea what a commercial building is or what a government building. The one point I want to point out, and this is 22 rules, the one thing I want to point out and past is apartment buildings 4 stories or more above ground are 179D eligible. That's going to be important when we talk about 45L in a second as well. But just remember that apartment buildings 4 stories or more above ground are also considered a commercial building for 179D. Starting in 2023, again, nonprofits we can pull in, which includes nonprofit entities, instrumentalities, tribal governments, the private college, university. You saw the list. This is not all inclusive. Bottom line, nonprofit, tax exempt organizations can now allocate this as well. Let's do a quick math, and I'm going to go through this fairly fast because we have a lot to touch on today. Under the old rules, if we had a 100,000 square foot building and we qualified for everything, that would have been a $180,000 deduction. If we were in a 37% bracket, that's a $66,000 tax savings. That is time value of money for that building owner. Hey, I would have got, all things being equal, tax rates and everything else, I would have got that $66,000 over 39 years. Well, now I get it in 1 year. Time value of money. That's important. That's worth a lot more to me today than it would have been over 39 years. For the designer of the government building, and now going forward, the tax exempt building, that's a free deduction to that designer. That's not a time value of money anymore. In this scenario, that $66,000 savings is money you as the tax advisor, the tax preparer, just put back into that business's pocket because they didn't know this existed. They didn't know they had this deduction. Now, all of a sudden, you just put $66,000 in their business. That's a big deal. It becomes a bigger deal in 2023 if they meet the requirements, because that same 100,000 square foot building, if it meets the requirements, well, we'll talk about with Marlon in a minute, but if it meets the requirements to qualify at a minimum, it'd be 25% reduction in energy usage. At that level, you get the $22.50 per square foot deduction at the 100,000 square feet at a 37% tax bracket. It's a $92,000 savings. So you went from 66,000 hitting the minimum levels, a $92,500 savings. And if you hit the maximum levels, it's a sliding scale going forward, that 50% reduction in energy usage plus some prevailing wage rules, which we'll maybe touch on a little bit through here and through 45L. That deduction could go as high as $5 a square foot, a $500,000 deduction, creating in this scenario, $185,000 savings, almost triple what it was under the old rules. That's why I said at the beginning, Marlon is going to become a very busy person because there is going to be a lot more opportunities for taxpayers to take advantage of the 179D, not just commercial building owners, not just government buildings, but now tax exempt buildings as well. Another example is if we didn't meet the prevailing wage rules, just be the bottom line, there's still a deduction out there. It's just smaller. I'm not going to spend time on that example. You will all get copies of these slides. I want to ask Marlon to come back on camera and hopefully on audio as too, which I'm sure he is. And
Absolutely.
let's just, all right, he's there. So Marlon, let's go through this real quick. Just these changes are obviously pretty significant. And let's talk, I mentioned the ASHRAE standards and, in past we were, I think originally we compared to 2007, another year we compared to 2012. Are these standards for ASHRAE standards going to change every year? And how's that going to affect their 179D?
Great question. So that's a trick question. Actually, they are going to, yes and no. So ASHRAE standards are constantly changing. They're going to change every year and they're going to come every 3 years. So typically, like you said, before we were using ASHRAE 2007 and 2012. This year, it has to be, you have to use the standard 2 years prior to the place in service. So with that being said, if your place in service building is 2021, the ASHRAE standards that you have to abide by is going to be ASHRAE 91 2019. And they're a lot more, I guess you would say, stringent on the efficiencies. So it will be a little bit harder to reach, but as these ASHRAE standards come out, building codes update as well. So if you're, designing to the building codes in today's, society, then you should be fine. There should be nothing to worry about.
And that's one reason they probably dropped it from a 50% reduction to a 25, because the standards are more current standards that we compared to.
Yeah, okay. And that's the whole purpose of this deduction. They want to keep that challenge going. So
okay, makes a lot of sense. And then I touched on it, but the prevailing wage, there's a secondary rule in here. Not only hitting the 25% or 50%. There's also a rule in here that says we have to be paying prevailing wages and apprenticeship requirements. And if we don't, it doesn't mean it eliminates a deduction, right? But it affects it some way. Is that correct?
That is correct. So it is going to affect it just a little bit. The deduction amount is going to change. So instead of getting, like, let's say $2.50 a square foot, if it doesn't meet and it's at the 25% threshold, you're now looking at 50 cents per square foot. So it drops the deduction a good little bit, but you're still receiving a deduction. And as far as each qualifying percentage over that 25% threshold, it now goes from 10 cents to 2 cents. And if it hits above that 50% threshold, instead of that $5 square foot, we're looking at $1 square foot. So okay. You're still getting something back, but it's just not as much.
Reduce. So it doesn't eliminate it. It just will reduce it. All right. Well, before I ask you the last question, I'm gonna put up polling question number 1. I didn't tell you at the beginning, just because I am so into this presentation. Not you, Marlon. Everybody else. This is for CPE. You do need to answer 3 of the 4 polling questions that are going to pop up. I'm popping up the first polling question right now. Make sure you answer that. Your CPE certificate is going to be sent to the email you registered with. Mark is also going to send your copy of the slides to that same email as well, unless Mark tells me something different. All right, one last question then. And I mentioned it, but is there some tax exempt entities that you would like to highlight that now can be, starting in 2383, can allocate this deduction?
Yeah, so there are some new ones. They're going to be like private-owned buildings, such as schools, universities, maybe some hospitals, even some churches, some private foundations, and even some political organizations. Like you said, this is going to open up a broad range of new opportunities for this deduction.
All right. And this is going to play out obviously over the next couple of years, but I mean, do you agree with me? I think you're going to be a lot busier coming up.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited because we get a chance to actually model some of these buildings that we haven't modeled before. This is a whole new world for us right now. So it's something exciting to look forward to.
All right, Marlon. Well, thank you for that. This is when this came out, I was very excited about it. I think we have a lot to dig in still, but I think this is going to be great for taxpayers and tax advisors as well to be able to have another opportunity they could bring to their clients.
Great
All right,
job.
Marlon.
Miranda,
Yep.
I meant to tell you, you got the ASHRAE name exactly correct. So great job, man.
All right,
All
thank
right.
you.